couldn't wait for you to come and clear the cupboards. But now you're gone and leaving nothing but a sign.
Probably about a decade ago now, I ran a game of Cyberpunk tabletop RPG through the online role-playing service Roll20. I didn't know anything about the setting, and I read the whole rule book in 2 days to prepare for the story that I wanted to tell. We ran about 2 sessions and then the game fell apart. I mean, what else? Scheduling conflicts, like always. I didn't hear another word about Cyberpunk until CD Projekt Red announced Cyberpunk 2077. I can't say that I was surprised, but I was happy. I wanted to experience more of the setting, especially since it seemed to have gotten a bit of an upgrade from Ghost in the Shell Blade Runner to a somewhat more grounded, realistic future dystopia focused on the hardships such a world would place on the layman. I mean, of course, though, we all know how that turned out. Instead of fixing their game, it would seem that CD Projekt Red has spent their time working with Studio Trigger to develop an anime in their beloved Night City. Studio Trigger is the studio behind Kill la Kill, Penny and Stocking, Gurren Lagann, Little Witch Academia, and you've probably heard of more. I even covered their show B&A Brand New Animal really early on in this channel's infancy. I'm actually a big fan, but Trigger has always had one issue. They have their good products, directed by Hiroyuki Imaishi, and then everything else. If it's not been touched by Imaishi's blessed hands, then it probably really doesn't reach the same heights as their most powerful pieces. But you might completely disagree if you prefer storytelling over spectacle. With anime being a visual medium, I'm far more concerned with spectacle. Well, imagine my joy when I learned that Edgerunners was directed by Imaishi. Well, this might be good, I thought to myself. Maybe where they failed in making a good video game, they can make a good anime. And you know what? I was right. Cyberpunk Edgerunners isn't bad. It's definitely not written by anyone at Trigger, though, I can tell you that much. No one at Trigger has seemed to ever have any interest in writing character-driven stories that get this personal and grounded. The closest Trigger original that I can think of that would compare well to Edgerunners is Darling in the Franxx, if that tells you anything. Edgerunners lacks the bombastic nature and over-the-top nonsense that Studio Trigger's work usually has, and that's a good thing. You know what else is a good thing? The show's amazing music.
Forgive me for letting you down. Forgive me for letting you down again. I guess I'm not strong enough right now.
Edgerunners' original score was composed by Akira Yamaoka, a name that you might recognize from the Silent Hill franchise. Not every Silent Hill game is good, but every Silent Hill game has good music. Akira Yamaoka is the man that makes that the case. Yamaoka's style of using Paul-stretched synths and bells is here in full force. Some of these songs are absolutely haunting and perfectly accentuate the downtrodden nature of Night City, while other tracks are emotional, heart-wrenching ballads that bring me back to my years of pining for a teenage sweetheart who seems all too emotionally distant from me. I'm actually blown away by how many genres of music this OST is able to cover. But to be fair, many of the songs were lifted from the video game soundtrack. Regardless, this will be going down as 2022's best soundtrack, and maybe even one of the best of the decade. In some instances, it's more impressive than the animation itself. Of course, the animation is Trigger quality through and through, thin lines, dark, strong shadows, and nice smeary in-betweens. It's not their best work, and there is some reliance on overly noticeable CG, but when the chips are down, Imaishi comes in with the Sakuga just like always, showing you where that budget went. There are a few standout scenes where it's absolutely questionable how it got past the editing department, but I feel like Trigger always has those left in for comedic effect. My only complaint is one interpretive choice that's used over and over and over again. Our main character David is a speedster archetype, like the Flash, meaning his ability is to move really fast. Whenever he does, the animators use this effect of multicolored after images as he effortlessly glides through the environment. It's extremely subjective, and you're welcome to disagree, but I'm just tired of seeing this used as shorthand for extremely fast movement. I don't get anything out of this effect anymore. It's been used for over 20 years, going all the way back to shonen series like Naruto and Bleach. The only thing that could arguably be considered new is how colorful it is. But that's not the only thing colorful in Edgerunners. The dialogue is expressive and jargon-heavy.
Hey, you gotta tell me who keeps feeding you these nuggets?
Oh, Saki, who else? Ain't no other editor who turns out BDs that sweet and cream. Won't pull nothing like that off the shelf neither.
No shit, brain's still buzzing. Be sick.
Slow, deep breaths, choom. Just left the head of a skezzed out chrome junkie. Cyberpsychosis ain't no joke. Anyway, Hurler don't, got more chips for you to slug.
Every 10th word out of these characters' mouths is some stand-in for another word. They use the word choom for friend, circ for circuit, eddies for dollars. On the first watch, it really breaks immersion. I understand that language evolves and they had a lot of these terms in the tabletop RPG, but this is going too hard for 50 years difference. Maybe if it was 200 years in the future, I'd have an easier time believing it. It also makes the dialogue hard to understand for individuals not familiar with the setting. This is something that breaks immersion and removes viewers from the core of what Cyberpunk has to offer. I'm not saying that the jargon should have been removed completely. Jargon is a hard thing to write into your setting without having a lot of exposition, but it can be done. This just isn't how. For what it's worth though, Edgerunners' story is still damn immersive. It's a story about what it means to be human and how much of David's humanity he's willing to give up to protect his safety and the safety of those that he cares about. In the world of Cyberpunk, if you replace too much of your body with synthetics, or chrome as the setting calls it, you'll eventually develop cyberpsychosis. The human brain just can't handle interfacing with all these non-organic parts repeatedly, and over time it just wears you down. You'll lose your sanity, start having visual and auditory hallucinations, and inevitably go on a killing rampage. The only thing that can deter it is extremely expensive medicine. Edgerunner attempts to tell a story about how someone would find themselves in this addictive cycle of self-destruction. David experiences the wrong side of a terrorist attack and loses his mother through no fault of his own. With no way to pay for his growing debts, he takes up a life of crime, joining a gang of cyberpunks, or Edgerunners as the show calls them. He then falls into the obvious trap of continuously replacing parts of his body with military-grade implants to keep up with the growing demands of his work. This is a fun story to tell, and Edgerunner delivers, but in a way that isn't new in any way. The show does nothing to subvert the viewer's expectations of the story. After about 3 episodes, you have a really good idea of where it's going. But that's not a bad thing, and that's not to say that it doesn't get where it's going in style. David's gang of misfit thieves is likable, and the writers do a good job of making sure none of them are too grating. Their motivations are believable and realistic, some of them are even funny. What the writers don't tackle well is the addictive nature of David's life. Though David falls deeper and deeper into his problems, the audience is never shown a real reason that he can't give it up and then live on the straight and narrow. Even when faced with situations that would stop most people, David decides to continue enhancing himself. Though it's obvious to the viewer that David gets addicted to the thrill of the criminal life a la Walter White, that's about the deepest explanation we ever hear. He just vaguely says he owes it to those whom he's lost for keeping going. An understandable reaction, but it doesn't gel well with David's flaws. David continuously has flashbacks to his mother and her dreams of him climbing the corporate ladder and having a normal life. But he never actually does anything to attempt to enact those dreams. Instead, he just falls deeper and deeper and deeper into a life of crime, never actually having a plan to get out of it. The show would have had much more impact had the audience been given a clear indication of David's endgame and goals so that we know what he has to lose. That's not to say that this type of character isn't believable or fun to watch. It would just be much more at home in a series that isn't a short 10 episodes long. You really need to spend more time with the character's self-sacrificing nature or discussing why they continue down their path when faced with a wake-up call like some of the things David goes through. About halfway through the show, a character describes David as the type of person who would jump into the fire to save someone even if he's going to get burned. Now that's an excellent description of the type of person that David is, but that's the same type of person that would be extremely upset if he found out that they had harmed individuals who didn't deserve it. David's a paladin archetype, his story is about falling, and it's just a shame that we don't get much more time with him battling those impulses. As a matter of fact, the show completely shoots past it using drugs to counteract his cyberpsychosis, in addition to a time skip, a likely unfortunate necessity with the show being as short as it is. Before the time skip, David is mostly organic, only having 1 or 2 synthetic parts. Between episodes, he completely swaps to the other side of the coin. For a series basing its character development on needing to replace organic parts for an honorable purpose, it does the show no service to completely skip the purposes in question, just leaving the audience to fill in the blanks. It makes sense from a narrative standpoint to have David eventually fall into this rabbit hole, but it makes no sense to completely have it happen off-screen. There is practically no argument for this outside of the lack of funding and deadlines. In a perfect world, we would have each episode show a moment where David has to augment himself to solve a problem until he just inevitably Ship of Theseuses himself. But you know what doesn't happen off screen? The R rating. I'm not sure I've seen an anime so gory or violent in a long time. Even the very opening scene of the show is hyper-violent. People absolutely explode into fine red mists, and it's extremely satisfying to watch in Trigger's action-packed style. Immediately after the violent opening, we're shown nudity to further impress upon the viewer how corrupt and twisted Night City is. This show is a great representation of debauchery in battle. It's commendable for Netflix to allow such extreme content on their program, honestly. Thanks to these choices, Night City comes off as faithfully and perfectly dangerous. Dangerous and beautiful. I've read that a lot of the sets in this show are lifted directly from its video game counterpart. I find that extremely easy to believe, considering the absolute feast for the eyes that is Night City. This show is a banquet of neon pink and purple flashes, and the characters are no exception. With designs from the character designer for Little Witch Academia and Valkyrie Profile, Yo Yoshinari, a single look at a character can give you understanding regarding their personality. Lecherous and sleazy, long arms to diddle you with. Energetic and bombastic, childlike features with expressive glowing red and green eyes. Strong and caring, a wide frame with large arms that makes you want to hug. It really is one of Edgerunners' best features, and the internet has taken note. There is nothing that anime communities like more right now than the show's red-eyed, short-stack Harley Quinn ripoff Rebecca. This is no doubt one of Trigger's best shows in a long time. I can't tell you how many times the music would kick in at just the right time while some good old-fashioned American gun violence skyrockets the adrenaline. Immersion is a sense of belonging inside of a story's world, and Edgerunners captures you with that feeling extremely well. It's a downright shame the few flaws that this show has. There is more that I could say, but I would honestly recommend watching the show yourself. If you're a fan of animation, you're doing yourself a disservice by not watching it. Go watch it now and feast yourself on the promises of a nightlife full of spectacle and dreams. Cyberpunk Edgerunners gets an 8 out of 10. Very good. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing. Thank you to our producers, Anthony Wumbo, James Novak, John Foreman, and Zachary Coroner.